Kansas City SQL Server user group. Glad you could join us for our leap year bonus lunch and learn with Deepthi Goguri presenting basics of Azure Arc for SQL Server. Welcome back, Deepthi. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Christina.
QA will be at the end, so feel free to pop those questions in the chat and we will review them at the end of the presentation. For the audience, this session is recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Once the recording is ready, I will place a link inside the Meetup event and various other places. You can always check our YouTube channel to see our listings. So with that, we're going to just jump right into it.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. So you're still seeing my screen in the presentation mode, right?
That is correct, yes.
Awesome. So welcome to Kansas City User Group, and I would like to thank Christina for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present for your user group. This is my second time. Last year I presented, last year in December, again this year in February. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. So today I would like to present on the topic basics of Azure Arc enabled SQL Server. So if you're not familiar with this topic, this session is like a overview and basics like what is Azure Arc and how to actually install and connect your on-prem SQL Server into the Azure and how you can access Azure Arc in Azure. So that is this session going to be. So hopefully you like it. So a little bit about me. I'm a data platform MVP, and I'm also a database administrator. Working since about like 8 years of DB experience, and I did my master's in Eastern Illinois University on computer technology, and I also do other SQL community stuff. Like I co-organize a couple of user group. I'm a co-organizer for Data and AI South Florida user group, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion user group, and also Data TGIF user group. Thank God it's Friday. That is the abbreviation of TGIF. And also I do volunteer for Women in Technology user group as well. Along with my office work and my community work, I love plants, arts and crafts as well. And if you have any questions regarding this session, and if you are unable to ask here, you're free to connect with me on my LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Just type by my name, Deepthi Goguri. You'll find me. And I usually blog about SQL Server and Azure on my website, dbnuggets.com. You can check the extension of this session on my website as well. So if you're on social media platform like Twitter, I'm also on Twitter. You can type by dbnuggets. You'll find me. So as an overview, we are going to see what is Azure Arc and how to connect your on-prem SQL Server to Azure Arc. So in this session, we are going to connect SQL Server 2022 to Azure Arc because there are a couple of ways you can do that. So I'm going to walk through that. And also, I would like to talk about like Azure Active Directory authentication for SQL Server 2022 as well. So I will dive into the steps of like how you can activate Azure Active Directory for the SQL Server 2022 because that is going to be a part of setting up this Azure Arc. So what is Azure Arc enabled SQL Server? So basically it is previously like Azure Arc is actually an extension where you can manage your inventory of your on-prem SQL servers wherever they are located outside of cloud. Wherever they are located, you can actually make a connection from your on-prem SQL server to the Azure through some of the extensions. By following a couple of steps, you can see all of your on-prem servers inventory actually on Azure Arc in your Azure portal itself. So it doesn't have to be the Azure SQL database. If you have Azure SQL database and Azure SQL managed instance, anyway, you can see it on the Azure portal. But this is like an extension of where you can actually manage everything on a centralized location in Azure portal. So that is what Azure Arc enabled SQL Server is. So not only the like inventory management, like how many SQL servers you have and where they are hosted on, like whether they are hosted on Windows or the Linux machines. You can see them separately. Like you can see what are the like what all machines you have, like a Windows or the Linux machines, and on the top of it, whether you like how many SQL servers were installed on the top of it. And you can also see like how many databases, whether they are online, or whether they are in the read-only mode, or if you wanted to install the extended security patches, you can also do that by using this Azure Arc enabled SQL Server from the Azure portal itself. And also along with that, you can also use the capabilities of like Azure Resource Graph Explorer, where you can actually, it's just like running a query on the Azure Resource Graph Explorer, where you can go ahead and uh, run certain select queries to get the information of your SQL servers. For example, like how many SQL servers do I have with the version SQL Server 2020, 2012, and the versions, and then like any other information related to your SQL Server databases. Those are the simple queries that you can run on the Graph Explorer that you can do. And you can also run the assessments on your SQL servers on-prem. So previously you used to have these assessments available only for your Azure resources, Azure SQL databases or the databases from your managed instances. But by using the Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, you can also run your assessment. Using these assessments, you can find the um, any policies that you have to implement, or whether your databases are up to the standards of the Azure, or like whether you need to make any changes to make it standard, those sort of things. And also you can use the Microsoft Defender for Cloud as well, where you can, by using the Defender, right, you can get the recommendations, like the best practices, security alerts if you have, and and also the protection, like by using the Defender you can also get those alerts if somebody tries to access your databases. um, you can also get those alerts, and also vulnerability assessments you can get by enabling the Defender. So all these things will happen to your on-prem SQL servers just because you have that extension and you are pulling up your on-prem um, information onto the Azure, and you have the portal over there, right? So you have all of these capabilities. If you do not have this extension, you are unable to use those capabilities, like enabling the Defender, for example. You cannot do that on your on-prem SQL servers. So for example, like I mentioned, like the primary importance is like you can manage your on-prem SQL Server no matter where they are located, but outside of cloud, you can pull them all in with that Azure Arc extensions. For example, let's say like here on this screenshot, you see the SQL Server inventory, and uh, and how many databases and what compatibility mode they are in, and version distribution as well, like what versions are enabled, and you can see all of those in the graphical view format, compatibility level, as well as the editions as well, like how many editions you have, what sort. And as this will give an overview, you can also share this graph to your management as well. If they wanted to see everything, like what all inventory we have, they can see it in a centralized view. So let's see what is the architecture and how to build actually. So there are three agents that are actually needed to install Azure Arc for your SQL Server. The first one is Azure Connected Machine Agent. So this agent will actually help manage both Windows as well as Linux machines, of course, hosted outside of Azure. That is the first basic machine agent to install the operating system itself. So you have to connect your operating system as well as your SQL server, right? Two different things. So, and then Azure extension for SQL Server. The first one is for the operating system, and the second one is for the SQL servers installed on that operating system. That's the Azure extension for SQL Server. The third one is Azure Monitoring Agent. Of course, this is not required to install the Azure Arc for SQL Server, but this agent is necessary if you wanted to use the Defender for Cloud and to get those best practices assessments for your on-prem SQL servers. So that's the third one, Azure Monitoring Agent. Oops. So if you wanted to see that in the diagram, right? The from the bottom, virtual server or the physical machine, the Azure connected machine agent, like I said, that is pointing to the Arc server, right? So the Arc server is the operating system itself. So by installing the Azure connected machine agent, that server will get activated, that operating system server itself will get activated, and that information, that operating system information will be visible on your Azure portal. But it won't show any of those Azure Arc SQL servers until you install Azure extension for the SQL server. So once you install, so the first one is Azure Connected Machine Agent that we need to install. On the top of it, we install Azure extension for SQL Server. Once we do that, then the SQL Server on those operating system machines will activate it, and then that information will be pulled into the Azure portal. So I will show you like where they will be visible on the portal. But these are the ones. And like I said, the Azure monitoring agent is required to pull those Defender information, right? All the information about your SQL server and put that information into the log analytics. To do that, that is the minimum required agent that needs to be installed along with this. So there are certain prerequisites. Of course, you need an active subscription, and also there are couple of like the prerequisites like Arc connected machine agent. To install the machine agent itself, you need to have some networking requirements. For example, on each of these, like you need to install the outbound rule on each of the server and enable the port for port 1433. And also there are like below other prerequisites that you need to follow. And also you need to register the resource providers before even beginning enabling the Azure Arc, that is Microsoft Azure Arc Data and Microsoft Hybrid Compute. So where do I install? Like how do I install these, right? The last one, like registering the resource providers, you find that in your Azure, like if you go to your subscription itself, on the left side pane, you see under the settings, you see resource providers. So once you click on that, you can search for those both resource providers. One is Azure Arc Data and Hybrid Compute. By searching them, you can just register them very quickly. And then there are certain service principal permissions that you need. So like I do not want to go through each of these steps, but having this slide will give you like what all permissions are needed. Like this particular service principal need the read permissions to the subscription, as well as several other permissions to the resource group itself where you are installing, right, where you are installing these the Azure Arc. So you need to have all of these read, write and other permissions. And it also needs, like if you are manually installing, you need administrator permissions, the person who installs, right? This particular service principal which installs, it needs the administrator permissions on the machine. And if you wanted to install at scale, like we have like 150 servers which we wanted to pull into the Azure. If you are doing it in scale, then you need user access administrator role and the other mentioned roles here. So currently in this example, we are taking the SQL Server, not the other versions, but the latest version. We are taking SQL Server 2022 that we wanted to um, like pull that server information into the Azure Arc enabled SQL Server. So the advantage that we have with SQL Server 2022 is we do not have this option in any of the previous versions. But with SQL Server 2022, while installing the SQL Server 2022, you have an extension, additional extension where you can click for the underneath the shared features, SQL Server extension for Azure. You can directly click this here while installing and go through the steps as you do it on your regular installations to install the extension to Azure. So while you do this, right, while you do this and then install the SQL Server, along with that, as you log into the Azure portal, you can already see your SQL Server 2022 with the Azure Arc enabled on your portal already, which this is kind of like behind the scenes. All of those agents will be installed without your intervention by just clicking this option. But um, like while installing, right, as you click on the feature selection, SQL Server extension for Azure, as you move forward at the Azure extension for SQL Server page, you need to provide all of this information. Azure Service Principal ID, and all of this subscription ID, resource group, and all of this Azure Tenant ID. I um, I entered this like at least 10 to 15 times, but I saw this. Everything was correct when I tried to enter all that information, but for some reason I do not know why, but I have seen this error. There are the validations on the page. Click OK to close this dialog box. I do not know because the error didn't give me any information, and I made sure I'm entering the right information. No matter how many times I do, I got this in this error, and I couldn't even install SQL Server or the Azure extension. So what I did was like, I do not want to go through this step, right? Just installing automatically, but I wanted to do it manually. If I see this issue, then the other option that you have is to go ahead and install manually. So what I did was like, I went to the Azure Arc SQL in the portal, Azure portal, SQL Server Azure Arc. I clicked on that, and then you get two options: connect SQL Server to Azure Arc and register disconnected SQL servers. So the use for connecting SQL Server to Azure Arc is um, so the difference between these two options, right? The first option will give you the inventory information, as well as you can install the extended security patches and all the other Defender and Defender to Cloud. You can, and then the vulnerability assessments, everything you can get with that first option. But with the second option, all you can do is mm, to install the extended security updates. If you only want that option to be enabled, then go with the second option. But the suggested one to use, like to take the advantage of every single feature that is available with Azure Arc, go with the first option. Connect SQL Server to Azure Arc. Once you do that, it will give you all the prerequisites that I already showed you in the slides, like the permissions required and everything, the service principal permissions. And then if you go next, um, just like any other installations, we need to provide the subscription ID and the resource group information where we want to install this resource. Um, and then the region, of course, and operating system. Like I said, you have Windows as well as Linux, right? So choose the option and then the server name that you want to install the Azure Arc on. And then if you have any proxy server URL, you can also provide that, and license type. So you have these three options, but I choose like I have a production environment on this server with enterprise edition. So my local system is an enterprise edition, which is already like which already covered the software assurance and subscription. So I choose the second option and then next. So basically you can give any tag. So basically these tags are useful, especially for the Azure Arc is like if your SQL Server um, is supporting any specific application, then you can give that application name as a tag so that while pulling up the inventory information, it will be clearly visible on like for this servers is linked to this application. Those sort of information you can enter here as a tag and then click on next. It says run script. So basically it will provide you um, with a script that you can actually download. You can copy the entire script or you can click the download button at the bottom. I copied the entire script and it will show you where you have to run the script. So basically you need to copy this code and you need to go to the server, SQL Server on-prem server that you wanted to install the Azure Arc. And then you need to open up the um, command line and then you need to install, like run the exact code on the server. So for Windows only, there is this, I can say that the point to remember, let's say the PowerShell script you download will be unsigned. So when you run, it says like this particular script is unsigned. So you need to go through an additional step to actually sign in that PowerShell script. Um, you can sign in the PowerShell script or you can run the script by setting the PowerShell execution policy to allow running unsigned scripts. So you can follow so while running, it will give you the steps of how you can sign in the PowerShell script by you can run this below code, get execution policy, scope current user. So you are allowing the current user to run this actually script, to run this script, to execute that script. So you need to additionally execute this particular script on the same page to allow that user to run that PowerShell script. So you are running that PowerShell script and this is how it looks like. But at the end, as it browses, right, it will actually do, it will it will authenticate first to sign in and then it will install. Like if you see the first one, it will force you to move into the web browser to open the page to authenticate. And once the authentication is successful, it will then go ahead and first install the Azure Connected Machine Agent. Like I said, the first thing it will register the machine itself, Windows or Linux machine itself, and then it will go ahead and install the Azure extension for SQL Server. So once that is installed, right, once it is successful, then you can go ahead and to your Azure portal and search for the Azure Arc on the top in the search bar, which will open up the Azure Arc, and you can see the um, servers here. So these are the server itself, like um, desktop server as well as my SQL server. So it will show everything that is actually registered. So the first one is the machine itself. By installing the machine agent, we got that first one, that is the machine itself. But the second one is my SQL server. So as I expanded that, I will have all the database information over there. So I currently have only the test database. It will show the status of whether it is online, offline, and what's the creation time. And you can manage you can see the inventory here of your instance. So along with like for the SQL Server 2022, if you want to connect, um, if you want to connect to the Azure AD, you need to follow certain steps for the Azure SQL 2022. So the link is like if you wanted to use the um, Azure AD for the SQL Server 2022, only through the Azure Arc you can be able to do that. So you need to definitely enable Azure Arc for that. So the prerequisites are um, you need to first create the certificate. Again, if you're doing it manually, you need to create the certificate and put that certificate in the Key Vault, and where like Azure AD application will automatically create. We will see the step by step of how to do that. So first we need to create the Azure Active Directory admin, and also we need to give the permissions needed. So we need the contributor role for the Key Vault and for the server, as well from the from the Azure Arc. So I'm using my account to do this action. So I need to give the permissions, necessary permissions, the Key Vault contributor permissions, the first one, and on the resource group as well, I need to give the contributor permissions. On if you see the I have given that on my SQL Server Azure Arc for the SQL Server, the bottom picture. There I have given the contributor permissions, and on the Key Vault itself, I have given the Key Vault contributor permissions. These are really, really important. We need to really, like, nobody can remember all these steps, but I have made sure like I put every single step here because I had a really hard time of figuring out um, like how to do this. Like we have the Microsoft documentation, but if you if you miss a single step, right, you will screw the entire thing. So I screwed up several times before I figured out. Like I followed only the Microsoft docs, but I thought like some steps are not needed, and I skipped some of them. I did wrong some of them, and I messed up everything, so I have to do it from the beginning again. So I made sure like I put all the steps here, and then we need to set up the access policies under the Key Vault. So once we build the Key Vault, once we give the account, the installation account, the contributor permissions on that Key Vault, we also need to give specific access policies permissions, like you are seeing here. You need to give the secret permissions, certificate permissions on the Key Vault. And then you need to also give the um, other permissions as well. All that you are seeing on the screen, I think this is an additional screen. And then um, once you once you do that, you can see the principal name here. I'm giving my account the permissions, and then save. So we also have given the access policies here. And then we have to set up the Azure AD admin setup for the SQL Server. So again, you need to go to the SQL Server Azure Arc, and then um, Azure Active Directory, and then go to my account, and then select the Key Vault that I wanted to do. So basically, on this screen, we need to um, make sure like whether you wanted to whether you wanted to do the service managed cert or the customer managed cert. So customer managed cert is where you have to manually do every step. Like you need to manually manage the certification once it is created. With the service managed cert, everything will be installed automatically for you. So once you click on the service managed cert, you will also have the application register created automatically, or else you have to manually create the cert and then create the required application registered separately manually. So this account, as you see the admin account on the top, that account I have given all the permissions previously, and it should be an admin login. So all that errors that I have seen while I was doing it is here. So I missed a couple of the permissions requirement previously. So I got several errors here while I'm doing this step. But since we have we know what permissions are needed, then I need to click on select. So behind the scenes, once I do that, right, we have selected service manage cert here and service manage app registration. So behind the scenes, what will happen is first the certificate will be created and it will be saved inside the key vault. And it will be always in the format of like your host name, that is your machine name. Next, your instance, SQL Server instance name, and it will allocate a unique number to it. That is the certificate. And then the Azure AD application is also created automatically in the format of host name, instance name, as well as a unique number. And you can see how the display name looks like, the left side, as well as yeah, you can see the display name of the Azure AD application. So the necessary permissions also will be granted to this application automatically. If you're choosing the service registered, like you are allowing the service to create this, the permissions to all of these will also be automatically granted. So remember, the certificate created automatically is not managed and rotated by Microsoft. It is up to the customer to manage the certificate. This one I found while I was digging into while doing the installation, I found this. So I put this slide here. So, so install Azure AD to connect it to SQL Server. So like I said, the first one is to create and register an Azure AD application and grant permissions to the Azure AD application. That will take care of automatically if you're choosing the automated installation managed by the service itself. Create and assign a certificate. Configure Azure Active Directory authentication for SQL Server through the Azure portal, and then create the logins and users by using that Azure AD account. So now you can go to the Azure Active Directory. We need to create the Azure Active Directory application. Go to the Azure Active Directory and so, okay. So previously we have seen how do we do it automatically by the service. Here we are trying to see how to do it manually by ourselves. So we need to go to the Active Directory first and then go to the app registrations, and we are registering the app manually. So new registration, and then register the application here, give the name, and then you need to give the supported account types and everything, and then click on register. Very simple to create. And then we need to give permissions to these applications, API permissions. And then remember, when the service registered this, it has automatically given the permissions on all of this. But since we are doing it manually, we need to manually go to the app registration and then go to the API permissions, and then we need to give the permissions to Microsoft Graph here. So click on the Microsoft Graph, and then it reads these application permissions that you are seeing here, the read all permissions, and then click on add permissions. And then again, go to the app registration again, and you need to click on API permissions and then add permissions again. You need to also give not only the read permissions, but also the delegated permissions on the Microsoft Graph. Read as well as the delegate permissions. So all the permissions that I have given here, I mentioned it over there. So all of the permissions are given and they are shown here under the API permissions. So these are the permissions that are needed on the registration, on the app registration. And then under the key vault, right, the certificate is automatically created under if you choose on the service account, like let the service manage all of that. But since we are doing manually, we need to click on the certificate and create the certificate manually, give the certificate name and all the other information I have blocked some of the information not to show, but most of them I put as a default. I did not change anything, and then go ahead and create. And then once you create and once you go to the certificate information, right, you'll see this download in CER format. So once you download that, you need to manually also go to the app administration. So the first screenshot, these are the two screenshots, not one screenshot. The first screenshot is showing the certificate. So you need to go to the certificate from the keyword, download that certificate, and you need to manually upload the certificate in your app registration. So the second screenshot is I went to the app registration, and then under the manage blade, I have gone through the certificate and secret. There I have to click on the certificate and upload this certificate that I just downloaded. So I need to manually do that. And then I need to upload the certificate that I just downloaded, right, from the keyboard, and then click on add. And again, I need to give permissions manually here. I have to go through the keyword, access policies, all these permissions that you previously saw. I need to give these permissions as well. And then um, in the key vault, like once those permissions are given, I need to go to the my key vault that I have been built, right? And then go to the principal, and I have to give the server itself. I have to add the server itself as the principal. This is one more step I have missed, and I have gone into the issues. So once you go to the principal, you can see the server name itself as the principal. So you need to click on that server. This is my a Windows server machine. So click on that Windows server machine, click next, and um, now um, underneath um, the SQL Server, right? Um, So we have added the principal of the Windows machine as well as a principal. And then after that, we'll come to the SQL Server that was installed on that particular machine, which is this highlighted as the SQL Server Azure Arc. Underneath the security blade, underneath the settings blade, Azure Active Directory, now we are selecting the custom managed cert, because now we did all the prerequisites, not the service managed cert, but this time we build our own manually. So customer managed cert we are selecting. And then here we need to manually click on the certificate, change certificate, and we need to manually click on the certificate that we just created. And also we have to do the same thing underneath the app registration as well. We have created the app registration manually, right? We need to go ahead and register that by clicking on the change app registration and then select that app that we created. So once we do that, select certificate. So here, once I click on the certificate, it will show this screen where I can choose the certificate that I manually created, and then click select. The same I have to do with the server registration as well. So click on the change app registration and then make sure you are selecting the right application that you created manually, and then click on save. So if you do not do any of the prerequisite steps properly, here is the place where you will see the error. So click on save. It will take at least a couple of minutes until you successfully see this save, right? So do not do any refreshes at this point of time. Just give some time to save this information. So now, so all this thing, right? We have, while beginning the session, we have already installed the um, uh, Windows machine as well as the SQL Server we have installed, and we have installed all of that by using the um, script that we have downloaded, and then we used the command line um, on the on-prem SQL Server we have executed, which actually installed the machine agent. On the top of it, it has installed the SQL Server extension. which have given us the ability to pull that server onto the SQL, onto the Azure Arc. So that is how we do with all of the SQL servers on-prem. But we have taken the SQL Server 2022 and all of the certificates and mm, certificates and app registration is only required if you wanted to do install Active Directory on the top of your on-prem SQL Server 2022. Because with SQL Server 2022, you have the ability to install Active Directory. You can use that Active Directory, but to install the Active Directory, you need Azure Arc. That is a link. Like you might have the question like why is she even showing about the Azure Active Directory in this Azure Arc? Because Azure Arc is required to install the Active Directory. That is the reason why I'm also showing this information. So we have seen both how to do how to allow the service itself to install the certificate and app registration to activate the Active Directory for the SQL Server 2022. But we also have seen how to manually create the certificate as well as app registration and how to use those to enable the Active Directory. Now, no matter what method you use, you already have the Active Directory at this point of time. So now I would like to connect it to my management studio from SQL Server, like local management studio, and I would like to um, um, see whether we have the Active Directory, like whether I have the my account that I have given the admin privileges, right? I have given admin privileges on that in the portal. So I should see that account listed underneath the logins. So to to give the permissions to that account, I need to alter the service role and I can make sure this account is the sysadmin on my server. And then to create other logins, right? You can use you can use these below queries to run on your management studio to create these logins as well. So so how do we create the Azure AD user, Azure AD group, as well as Azure AD application? How do you create those? So these are the ways that you can create. And for connecting with a supported authentication method, you actually have to create the authentication as an Azure Active Directory universal with multi-factor authentication, and then provide your uh, admin account or any other account, and then you hit on connect. If you have permissions, then you will be able to connect to the server. And for the bulk installs of Azure at Azure Arc for your SQL servers, like if you have like 200 SQL servers and you wanted to install Azure Arc, if you want to enable Azure Arc for your SQL server on all of them, it is tedious to do one by one manually, right? So you have couple of methods to do it in the bulk. So manually, if you wanted to do it, the like downloading that script while um, you try to install the Azure Arc from the portal, you need to download that script and then open up the command line from your on-prem SQL server and run that script. That is one way to do it for the manual installs. But for the bulk installs, you need to there is a policy where you can search on Azure portal, which is known as configure Arc enable machines running SQL Server to have SQL Server extensions installed. So there is this one policy that you can do, and then you can run that policy to go first search for any of your Windows or Linux machines that you have. It will go like those Windows machines or the Linux machines should already be available on the Azure portal, right? Like they should already have that machine account that we discussed, the first primary step that we need to install to pull the Windows accounts onto the portal. that should be already installed, and all of those Windows or Linux machines should be available um, on the Azure portal. So once they are there, by running this policy, it will go ahead and search for any of um, it will search for all of those machines if there are SQL servers installed on the top of those machines, and then it will automatically go ahead and install the Azure like extension for the SQL Server automatically. So that is one way to do it. Or there is another way that you can do it by going into the portal and by searching in the search pane Azure Arc. Like by searching that, it will list all of your Windows or the Linux machines, right? So you will find on the top, you'll see automatic Arc enable SQL Server registration. So once you click on that, it will automatically do the same thing, right? It will install the extension for the SQL Server automatically. So what we have learned so far, so we have seen what is Azure Arc and what are some a couple of benefits that it have, and how to connect your SQL Server to Azure Arc, as well as like by using the SQL Server 2022, you can install like you can enable Azure Active Directory, but for that installation, like to enable Azure Active Directory on your SQL Server 2022, you need to have Azure Arc enabled as a prerequisite. So that is the reason why I showed it is a good learning because there are several steps that you need to follow to enable Azure Active Directory. So we have seen that as well. And these are the resources and references that I followed. From the bottom, if you see the fourth step, right, fourth point, I have written all the like this on my blog. I have written series of blog posts on SQL Server to Azure Arc. Like I can say that this is an like those blog posts are an extension of this particular session. If you'd like to know more, please visit my website. And yeah, I would like to thank you all for taking your lunch break to sit here very patiently listening to my voice for so long. Uh, and I hope you learned something today. And I wish you all the best. And thank you, Christina, for giving me this opportunity again. And I hope to
Thank
see you soon.
you. Yeah, excellent, excellent. We did have one question come in, and that is
So,
SQL 2022 the earliest version for Azure Arc?
so the question um, is SQL Server 2022 the earliest version of Azure Arc?
Yeah, and I think they mean compatible with, yeah.
So you're like, if I understood correctly, you're asking like um, only SQL Server 2022. No, like I'm so sorry if I'm confused of that question. But if you're saying like whether only SQL Server 2022 will have the ability to use the Azure Arc, no. Like even the previous version, SQL Server 2012 or any other on-prem servers that you have, everything can access the Azure Arc by using those two extensions.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I think that's what they were
But
asking.
the additional thing was like Azure Active Directory, right? SQL Server 2022 have the ability that we can enable Azure AD for our on-prem SQL Server. So, but the prerequisite is Azure Arc. So that is the reason why I actually showed all of those steps.
Sure, sure. And what would be like the ideal or just whatever a use case for Azure Arc?
The use case is the mainly for the inventory. Like if you cannot go to the Azure soon, like if you cannot move your applications or databases into the Azure, and but still wanted to leverage the benefits of Azure Arc, where the benefits are mainly like managing your inventory both on-prem as well as Azure in a single pane, and also by you can take the advantage of like vulnerability assessments, and in a single pane you can go ahead and use those extended security patches. If you want, you can install those from the Azure portal itself. But if you
Okay.
do not have that, it's like it's like an extension to use Azure services while you're still in on-prem.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you once again for doing such a great presentation for us. We really appreciate it. Definitely a bonus for us this month to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And that today concludes our Lunch and Learn. We're coming up right against the hour, about 5 minutes till. So go run and do what you got to do for 5 minutes. We'll give that back to you before your next 1 o'clock meeting starts. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you,
joining us.
Christina. Thank you. Bye. Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.